go ahead and start recording. All right. So, I want to go over a few things. Let's go ahead and we will not be utilizing our check-in right now. We'll look at the check-in at the very end. The check-in dog test. All right. Do you have all your documents?
I'm missing my exam card.
I can print it for you.
Sorry.
I have
Yeah.
there's a printer here.
By that you mean the nose and dues?
Yeah.
For every class?
And then your exams for the with the kids. Okay. You can keep them.
Oh, okay.
We're gonna like spar. Okay. And let's see. It'll print right behind you. You can keep those. All right. So let's go ahead and start. I want to start with, so I'm doing this new thing with little stickers. So take your pick. You can select at random, or you can look at, and you can, I love to put the stickers on my computer or anything. So they're little positive, inspirational stickers. Just for a little positive, a little positivity. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. So today we are having our student work analysis meeting over unit exam 2. So let's do you have your pre-work in front of you?
Yes, I do.
Okay, awesome, perfect. Okay. All right, so I want to go ahead and open up the meeting with our goals. So what is our target goal? Can you tell me?
Our goal is to reach 97 approaches, 81% meets,
Okay.
and 37% masters.
Okay, with an achievement average of?
72%.
Okay. Can you walk us through your results for this exam?
Our results for the exam were 88.1% approaches, 68.1% meets, and 25.9% masters with an average of 66.3%.
Okay. And you were third out of 13 in the RGB and 4 out of 37 for the district. So just so you know. So you scored above the district for in the RGB and overall. So that was great. All right. So last time on your last exam you were at 87.54.20. That was for your mid-unit exam, and you were at an achievement average of 52. So I just really want to commend you. You went up 9 points, right? Or no, well, more, because what was the achievement average that you had?
66.3.
I had a 61. I don't know how I got that. Let me see. I wonder. You had 88, right? 88, 68, 26.
Yes.
So it's a 60.6. So it is a 61. Just so if you can make that. No.
I have a question. Is this the percentage
Oh.
of their test?
No, this is their. So whenever you look at Illuminate, so if you know how it categorizes, you're looking at those percentages. So it's not necessarily what they score. It's based on did they meet the criteria for passing, and then for meets, and then for masters.
Oh, okay. I thought it was their grade, their average grade.
No,
Oh.
that's why it's a little off. So the student achievement is a 61. Last exam you were at a 52. So there was an increase. So I just want to take this opportunity to commend you on your growth. So you went from 52 to 61. What do you think caused this increase of 9 points?
I think so the first unit was pretty I guess vague.
Okay. What was the first unit?
It was ecology.
Okay.
So there was a lot of having to build up things that they should have done, I guess, learned in 7th grade, that I had to catch them up on.
Okay.
And then also a lot of math that they needed to catch up on, like basic like division and ratios and stuff like that. then which they're using for all the other units. So
now they've already built the
Yeah.
skill.
Yes.
And what was unit 2?
Unit 2 was evolution.
Okay, awesome. So today I want to dive into the standards 7A and 7C specifically. We're gonna look at questions 3 and 13. And so let's look at what did students need to know in teach 7A in order to master this team?
They needed to know that the number of shared characteristics can help determine the closeness between species, so
Okay.
evolutionary closeness. And they needed to know the categories of evidence for evolutionary change and how that scientists use that evidence to infer evolutionary relationships among organisms.
Awesome. So if you have to look at that last statement, categories of evidence for evolutionary change and how the evidence is used to infer, what do you think is what do you think would be the one thing that students struggle with the most?
I think that one is that one would be more the DNA, the DNA analysis.
Okay.
Did you mean what category?
No, so not necessarily the category, but I think that what I'm trying to push your thinking is looking at the word infer. So an inference, right, is it's not on the answer's not on the paper, right? Like they have to guess and see like based on all these things that have happened, like what would be the the long-term effect. So students have a lot of issues when it comes to inferencing because it's a critical thinking skill, right? So let's make a note on infer. That's a critical thinking skill. And the reason why I'm telling you this is a lot of the times, right, if we give the students a question, right, maybe, or like a graph or something, the answer's on the graph, right? And so it's a matter of them being able to read it or taking that knowledge and applying it to their answer, right? But in a case like this, where they have to infer, they really don't have anything to go on. It's using that evidence to see like, okay, well, what would be the outcome? And what do students need to do in order to master 7A?
They needed to interpret data or images depicting similarities and differences between species and use given information to predict relationships between species.
Right, so look at the wording, right? Interpret, and then what do they have to do with that once?
They need to predict.
Yeah, they need to predict, right, which goes back to the inferencing. All right, so we are going to, let's go over 7C. So what do students need to know in order for them to master this teak?
They need to know the 4 principles of natural selection, which are variation, struggle of existence, adaptation, and descent of modification. And they need to know that struggle of existence or limiting factors is what influences a population's fitness.
Awesome. And so what did they have to do in this teak in order to master?
They needed to apply the principles of natural selection to a scenario and identify what the limiting factor was that affects natural selection. And in this case, in question, it was climate change, decreasing food availability. And they need to describe the connection between the 4 principles.
Awesome. Have you ever seen, I'm going to go a little off track. Have you ever seen Bloom's taxonomy? The questioning? Okay. Let me show that to you. And you can look it up. There's a lot of different graphs or tables. So Bloom's taxonomy. So these are type of questions, right? That we in education, question the student, right? And so I'm gonna print it out first so we can talk about it. But as you're looking at the image, I don't know if you noticed, right, but there are different levels of questioning, right? So you start with basic knowledge, right, recall, and then look at the verbs that are under knowledge, for example, like define, identify, describe, so they're very, very basic. And then, thank you, and you can keep one. So on the far right, you have verbiage like evaluate, right, and then you have verbiage like create, and then look at those verbs, right? You have rewrite, collaborate, illustrate, connect, apply, and so these verbs are of higher thinking, right? And so the higher you go on Bloom's taxonomy, the more critical thinking skills that the students need to develop. So our goal what do you think our goal would be to be kind of where in the range? Do we want to stick to the lower blooms or do we want to go to the higher blooms?
Higher.
Yeah, because so the prediction is that if they're able to evaluate,
Mm-hmm.
then they're gonna know the knowledge, right?
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, if they can analyze, then they can understand.
Mm-hmm.
Versus if they only know how to understand, then they're not gonna be able to apply it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's super helpful.
Mm-hmm.
All right, now let's go into your teacher exemplar. So have your teacher exemplar, and we are going to compare to my exemplar.
Mm-hmm.
So I did it on the test, and so I'm gonna give you about 2 minutes to look at the standard, which was 7A, and you can compare it to your exemplar. What were things that we both had, and what were things that maybe I had that you didn't have? And I'm gonna give you 2 minutes. I'll time you. If you don't need the whole time, just let me know. Okay, well, that's fine. You can look at it and we can make notes, right? And so this is your first SWAM meeting.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that it's super like eye-opening, like once you see the pre-work like that we do, now it's like, okay, now you know what the expectation is, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So what were some things that you noticed were maybe missing from your exemplar?
So I guess next time I'll do it on a test.
Okay.
Instead, and write it by hand. But also the vocabulary words, even the like simple words like scarce and forage. Yeah. I should have defined that for the students. And
Why do you think that? Why do you think I picked that specific vocabulary?
I guess they're more uncommon, so especially for the EL students.
So it's more like academic vocabulary. So it's probably words that they don't use on a regular daily basis. And so maybe in a household where, like parents are educated or have a degree, like yeah, like you'll hear those words, but in other households like that might not be. And so we want to ensure that we're always giving our kids a fair chance. So academic vocabulary is what I hear. What else?
Also, you created a kind of like a way of thinking that the students would have, like a thinking pattern of what they should have.
Okay. Why do you think something like this would be super impactful to have, let's say, prior to the kids taking the test?
So I guess I don't know what mistakes they can make.
Yeah, and so like let's say that you do this at the beginning of the unit, right?
Yes.
And so let's say that there's a day that you are teaching this TEAC, right? How would that be impactful? Would you knowing that you already did this, and then prior to you teaching it, how do you think that would be impactful?
I guess I can give them similar questions. That would where they first where they get stuck.
Yeah, so I think like being very purposeful in creating like a criteria for success for the kids and saying like this is how it's going to be tested, so I know where their gaps are going to be, and you can start to fill them in prior to them getting to the test, right? Okay, so I have academic vocabulary, thinking pattern. Anything else?
So for the doing, I guess I didn't put the interpreting comparative images, and also I didn't include the important vocabulary words. So I guess this is,
Awesome.
how to use the vocabulary words.
Okay, awesome. All right, so now let's go into question 13, and you're going to do the same. So I'm gonna give you 2 minutes. And I'm gonna probably call Miss Blanca and apologize. Okay. So for question 13, what was it that you had, and what was maybe something that you were missing?
I wrote just, I guess, the most important part, that they need to know that eukaryotes have a nucleus which contains linear chromosomes.
Mm-hmm.
But for yours, you put that you actually described every single one of these, even though, I mean that wasn't like the main focus of the test, but I guess the kids would also have questions about those.
Yeah, so I think, and I had eukaryote or prokaryote, right? And so I started with I guess the biggest difference, right? So, more evolved, less evolved, and then I went into one having organelles, one having almost no organelles, and then I talked about the linear DNA. And so I did include the organelles just because that is like the basis of the cell, right? And so these kids have seen the organelles in 7th grade, so it should be a kind of a refresher. And also because when they see like mitochondria, then that's always like it gives it away, like, oh well, that's a eukaryote. So then immediately they would have known like the connection here. And with that they could have then, okay, well, how are these three, well, right, how would these three be similar, or how would these three be similar, right? Because they already knew that these have sort of a connection. And so that's why I focus on the mitochondria. So then I hear you focusing a little bit more on organelles in this particular question.
I think, I guess the main difference is that I didn't give them information on prior knowledge that I think that they should have had. It's like I assumed that they would know.
Right, so activating prior knowledge. Yeah, that's super, that's awesome. And I know that having these meetings, it's not about like what did you do wrong, it's a matter of like how can you identify where your gap is and like how you can close it for the next test, right? And it's always with getting better in mind. All right, let's look at your 2 highs that you have, the 2 student work samples. All right, so let's look at question 3 for these kids. Did they have any sort of annotation?
For both of them? Or
Well,
just
let's look
one?
at 3 first. Just both of them, look at question 3.
One had more annotation than the others.
Okay, so what did the student write?
The first one underlined the word winter and increase for the peak length, and in the question they underlined the peak length in these words.
Okay.
And then in the answer choices they crossed off fend off,
Okay.
they crossed off fitness, and they crossed off decrease. And underlined seeds and bird feeders and lettuce.
Oh, okay, so then they made this seed and they made this connection, I'm assuming, over here?
Yes.
Okay.
And then for letter B they put not fitness. For the longer beats, increase fitness. And then for letter D they put not decrease.
So it increased. Right. Okay, so I think that just and this is one of the biggest next steps that I saw in looking at all of this. you notice that the annotations overall are very minimal,
Yes.
right? And so I think that it's great that these kids are getting 100s, but I think that it's really hard for us to be able to see where the gap is. So let's look at now, we're gonna see, we are going to see the mids, and we are going to, and we're focusing on question 3 at the moment, then we'll go back to 13. What did these students do?
They didn't have any annotations.
Okay, so this one says longer beaks is better access for seeds. So great, right? Like they wrote in their own words what the beak would have to look like in order for them to access the seeds, and so then they made that connection like longer, and they were able to deduce the answer. Yours had no annotations on the mid?
No.
Okay. And then the lows.
One low just underline the beginning of the question or the paragraph for
Okay.
pairs majors, and on the question the shift in deep length in these birds, and that's it. The other one didn't answer.
Okay. So this one says the primary feed from the bird is small because the bird has small body and organs. So they're referencing like the size of the bird, right? And so that it's small, so it has a small beak. But having nothing to do with the question, right? So what is basically the gap that maybe like these students would have? What is it that they did not understand? What's the underlying misconception and the error?
I think they're not understanding the question is them, I guess. Like what the is trying to like portray.
Okay.
And I feel like they don't get natural selection.
Why? Why do you think they don't understand natural selection?
They don't really identify the issue, the limiting factor or the struggle of existence that influence the
Okay.
natural selection.
So I have students made the mistake of not identifying a wild habitat versus man-made. So if we read the question, right, or the paragraph says the bird, whatever, is commonly found in man-made habitats. So by looking at this portion of the question, what two answer choices could they have immediately crossed out?
B and D.
Yeah, B and D, just by that, right? So now we're down to two answer choices, which is a lot better, right? So then the choices were allow the birds to better fend off predators and then to better access the seeds. So I'm gonna ask you a question, and I just want you to be honest. Do you think, right, that kids know what fend off means?
Probably did. But I mean,
I'm gonna take a guess and say no. And just because I think that even though it's like layman's terms, I don't think that in our demographic that students are using this terminology, right? And so I think that whenever you're starting this new unit, right, or you're about to get, or I think your test is in like 2 weeks, or no, this Friday, right?
For the next unit?
Yes.
For the next unit is in 2 weeks.
Okay. So then I think that what would be super impactful is like if you go through the test and maybe you look at words that you think that students wouldn't know. And maybe it's something that you can maybe add in your do now, right? Like you can add maybe like 2-3 words and like have them define it. I'm so sorry, but Mr. Wilson is calling on the line. Yes? I'm gonna check in F building. In A, the one with Soraya? Okay, let me call on. Bye. Okay. Bye. Is anybody available available in e-building? Repeat. In e-building, if anybody's available, would you mind checking in on Soraya's sub? I hear that she's having behavior concerns, but I'm gonna check in all the way in F building. Thank you, I think that was you and I, thank you. Alright, and so, okay, so then we said, looking at their, so then what would you say the biggest misconception here was? Like we saw this component and then we saw this component, so what do you think the biggest misconception is?
I think the biggest misconception was the habitat comparison, I guess. So the limiting factor.
Okay, yes, but that's the error. So why did they not know the limiting factor? Like being deeper, like what is it that they are not understanding how to do, which is leading to the error?
I guess they didn't, as in like, vaguely, like in a broader.
Yeah, okay, so not so specific, like in a broader manner, but what is it that they're not understanding?
That, the bird is in the manual habitat.
Okay, but and I'm just trying to push your thinking, right? I don't want I want you to come up with the answer, and so I think that, let's say that you taught the habitat, but if the students didn't know what habitat was specifically, would they be able to understand?
Yeah.
So like if you tell me, oh well, like a man-made habitat,
And they didn't know that.
and I don't know what a habitat is, am I gonna understand?
I don't think so.
Okay, and then if I read wild habitat, am I gonna, like, if I don't know what habitat is, am I going to understand the difference? So then what is it that they're not understanding?
The vocabulary.
There you go, the vocabulary. No, it's fine, right? The vocabulary, that's what they're struggling with, right? So if you go and say wild habitat, and imagine, and I tell you this because I'm an EL, right? Like my first language is Spanish. If you translate that, wild in Spanish is like crazy, right? So then imagine like as an EL student, like crazy habitat, like what? Like it makes no sense, right? And so I think it's maybe like using visuals to show them what a wild habitat would look like versus a man-made habitat, right? All right, and then also I think that just you having a very clear criteria for success of what you're looking for. But can you know what you're looking for if you yourself don't do it? No. So then you need to have a very clear understanding of what you're looking for prior to going into the test. So let's punch it, right? For question number 3, what was the we know that the misconception was the vocabulary. So what is one way that you can fix that?
So what I've started to do is to do vocabulary quizzes.
Okay.
But I guess I'll add also like non-biology words on there
Yeah.
that they might have difficulty with.
Okay. And then you can also incorporate it. We discussed earlier. Do now, right? Like you can add it during the do now. And then so that was one next step, the vocabulary, and then the second next step was over you having your criteria for success, right? Okay, so now let's look at question 13.
For the lows?
For the highs, we always start with the highs and we work our way down to the lows. Why do you think we start with the highs? Well, right, if a high student gets it right, and they have super good annotations. Hold on.
Oh.
Yes, I'm ready. Hi, Ms. Rico. Okay, so for the assurances, the ARD committee assures that removing students with disabilities from the regular educational environment occurs only if the nature or severity of the disability is such that the education in regular classes with the use of supplementary aids and services cannot be achieved satisfactorily. The ARD committee assures that each student with a disability participates in non-academic and extracurricular services and activities, including meals and recess periods with non-disabled students to the maximum extent appropriate to the needs of the student. The ARD committee assures that to the maximum extent appropriate, students with disabilities, including students in public or private institutions or other care facilities, are educated with students who are non-disabled. You're welcome.
You can go ahead and go down to the, that one right there, just give like a brief overview.
Okay. So like I was saying, right? So if you look at the highs and they have a really good set of annotations, then you can use them as an exemplar and say, okay, this is what the exemplar student would look like, and then you use them to compare your lows to them, right? I don't know if Anna had mentioned this to you in passing or whatnot, but for example, like whenever you assign the kids to do work, right? You always want to check on your high students first. Why? Why do you think that's super impactful?
If they don't get it, then the others probably don't get it.
Yep. Like if you teach Ms. Munoz's class, right?
Mhm.
And you look at Kayla Gallego and she doesn't get it, then that's a super red flag. It's like, hey, I need to pull everybody back and I need to do a whole group reteach, right? So did you have any annotations?
Yes. One student wrote or underlined most likely to predict and most distantly related to eukaryotes, and they wrote most different.
Oh, that's great. Okay.
And then they wrote down organism one is odd one out.
Awesome. Okay. So they saw it from a different perspective. Do you see?
Yes.
So instead of seeing like which ones are alike, they saw the one that stood out,
Yes.
right? Because when I approached this question, I guess the way my mind worked, I was like, oh, look, these three, like these are related. And this student, instead of seeing this, saw it the other way around, right? This one said, no, I don't know what it says. Something to the rest of the rest. So they were able to see the difference. Okay, let's move on to our middles.
They didn't annotate.
Okay.
Yeah, none of them.
Okay, so this one's circular. They looked at circular and they noticed that it was just one that had it. So then they were able to say, okay, well, like oddball out, right? But they underline eukaryote, but they don't have anything labeled for eukaryote. So I don't know, right? Like if they would have underlined it, maybe they would have made the connection to these two. Like there's a nucleus there, but they didn't. And then for this one, no annotation, and they picked 3. Now, why do you think they picked 3? I can tell you of the just by looking at it, but I want to see if you can see it. It's wrong, but why did they pick organism 3 over all the others? Well, count the things that they have. How many things does this one have? This one? This one? Well, I would count as 2, right? How many does this one have? That's how the student came up with that answer. So which one's different? Oh, well, the one that has the most, right? And so I think that it's super impactful if you look at the test prior and see and try to see it from different perspectives, because then you can go into the test and say, or not into the test, but into like a question or whatever, and say, okay, how would we approach a question like this,
Mhm.
right? We're not counting the things that are there. We're looking at the actual similarities and differences, right?
Mhm.
All right. And now let's look at our lows. So this one did the same misconception. Notice they even numbered them, right?
Mhm.
So once again, we see kind of along with what the other
Mhm.
student did, right? All right, and then did yours have
They just underline it.
did yours have annotations?
Just underline the question.
This one's. I'm gonna come up. Ms. Bravo, I don't think it allows the request control because they're a guest of the organization. Okay, so so for that question, what do you think was the biggest misconception? What were the students not able to do?
I guess identity or differentiate between vocal and material.
Okay, but what did they have to do in order to understand? Did they have to, besides prior knowledge, right? What did they have to do to this diagram?
I guess, well, first they have to decide whether they're looking for the most similar or most different, I guess.
So I guess my question to you is, can I answer, I mean, I could, right? But can I, if I was a student, could I answer the question if I didn't annotate the diagram?
No.
So what do they have to do?
Annotate.
So the biggest error, right, is the evaluation or analysis of the picture of diagram. Now, that's like their underlying gap, right? Like that's what they're not able to do. Because they're not able to do that, the mistake that they're having is that they're labeling or mislabeling, right? So then your next step would be, for this one, anytime there's a diagram, did you find your paper? Is it this
I had another paper where I had notes.
I think it's,
The Bloom's paper.
you can look at the paper, find it, like it's okay. So for this is anytime there's a diagram, what do we need to do? Label it. Label diagrams. So anytime you're teaching and there's a diagram, it needs to be fully labeled. All right. So can you recap your next steps that came out of this meeting?
I need to incorporate more vocabulary in the do nows, and also I need to do the test myself and see the different approaches that the student have.
And we call that an exemplar. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
So for the criteria for understanding, and then also to, I guess, do more practice questions and how the students annotate and label diagrams whenever they see them.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's go ahead and go and tell me when your next test is.
So Thursday and Friday.
This week?
Yes.
Tomorrow? And this is a what? A mid
A
unit?
unit exam.
Unit,
Yes.
unit 4?
3.
Unit, oh, this is unit 3, okay.
Mm-hmm.
So then, can we say that we can have our next SWAM meeting on the 17th of November?
Yes.
So, 17th, our next SWAM, and that'll be for exam 3.
Mm-hmm.
Can you give me a date
Mm-hmm.
where I can see these next steps being implemented between tomorrow and the 17th?
Could it be next Tuesday?
Let me look at my calendar.
Because
Next Tuesday would be the 9th.
anytime after Tuesday.
Would, right after lunch work?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I'm going to send you an invite. You should have received. And I'm gonna put observation on next steps from SWAM. And I will be looking for Duna,
Mm-hmm.
right? The Duna would have an incorporation of what?
Vocabulary.
Mm-hmm. And I'm not gonna be able to see the exemplar, right? Because that's not necessarily the test,
Mm-hmm.
but what should I also see during the class?
I just look at the top performing students.
Not necessarily your last step, your
Oh,
last next
I
step.
guess practice question and
Using what?
diagram.
Diagrams. Absolutely. Okay. And that concludes our SWAT meeting. How do you feel?
I'm laughing a lot.
You're what?
I didn't realize how many gaps I had.
Well, it's okay.